In this exercise, we're going to be editing dialogue, really. We've got two versions of the same speech, on a two-shot and on a single. Tim's speaking and he's talking to Helen, and the exercise is about how to cut the dialogue. We can't stay on one shot, for example, for the whole of his speech. It's good to vary the shots, and it's more interesting to vary the shots. But where do you do it? Where do you want to emphasise the close-up, and where is probably the lesser important dialogue? We can go to the two-shot to pick up at least Helen sitting there appreciating what Tim is saying. Let's have a look at the shots. First of all, the two-shot.
Well, I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long lying. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands for tea to be brought up and served. I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout of Ruby, a la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs. Well, that pleases him. It's just our little Sunday morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
Okay, and here's Tim's close-up.
Well, I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long lie-in. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands that tea be brought up and served. I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout of Ruby, a la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs. Well, it pleases him. Just our little Sunday morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
So there we are. When should we be on Tim's close-up, and when can we go to the two-shot? More importantly, I think, how can we cut the picture so there's no continuity problems, no facial expression problems, and the dialogue track doesn't click as we go from one shot to the other? I think probably the best thing to do is to lay the two-shot down first. Mark the front, mark the end, and on it goes onto the timeline. So I suppose the first thing to do is to look on the two-shot as to where Helen reacts. In other words, that would give us a good reason for cutting away from Tim, because you could play the whole of the speech on Tim and enjoy his close-up. So if we're going to dilute that view by going to the two-shot, we have to have a reason for going to that two-shot. So let's have a look at the bits that we really must see on the two-shot.
Well, I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long lying. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands for tea to be brought up and served. I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout of Ruby, a la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs. Well, that pleases him. It's just our little Sunday morning thing. He's a big...
So I would suggest we really should be there for two places. We should be there for her laugh.
A la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs.
So after upstairs, downstairs, two shots. So I'm going to put a dummy edit in there. So we're initially on a two shot here. When do we go back to his single?
Well, that pleases him. It's just our little Sunday morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
So I would suggest just our little Sunday morning thing.
Just our little Sunday morning thing.
And I would suggest probably keep it to the end. So let's find that on Tim, and we've started editing the scene. So just our little Sunday morning
Stairs
thing.
downstairs. Well, it pleases him. Just our little Sunday.
So let's plonk that in. So let's have a look at that.
A la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs. Well, that pleases him. Just our little Sunday morning thing.
It's not the best edit in the world because on the outgoing, Tim is looking down, on the incoming, he's looking up. So let's enter the trim mode and see if we can delay the cut such that he comes up at least on the two shot. That looks better. Try it.
Pleases him. It's just our little Sunday morning thing.
I'm tempted now to stay on the two
Just our
shot.
little Sunday morning.
Yes, I'm decided. Let's stay on the two shot till he drops his head back down again, and we'll just take his last phrase. He's a big fan, you see, on the single.
Little Sunday morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
Shaking it around slightly.
Little Sunday morning thing. He's a big
Sunday morning thing. Keep him down.
Sunday morning thing. He's a big morning thing. He's a big fan.
That's good, because we just catch the end of his little giggle.
Morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
Perfect. Very good indeed. I like that a lot. Now, the other point I thought we might go to the two-shot is when Helen leans back in her chair.
And his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long line.
A long line. So again, I'm going to put a dummy edit in there. Now, looking at it from the start...
Well, I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long line.
Yes, I think that's going to be very good. Let's start on the close-up and release after he says...
Sunday morning is a long line.
A long line. So let's find Tim's shot. Mark the front of it.
Well, I'm always up first.
Out. And plonk that in. Let's just see what the edit looks like.
Well, I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long... when he...
Oh, well. Performance was at a different speed. Long line. And again there you can see the incoming and the outgoing in trim. And he does that lean back as well, so that's going to be perfect. Let's have a look.
Morning is a long line. When he wakes. Morning is a long line.
Just a couple more frames on that, maybe.
Morning is a long line. When he wakes. Morning is a long line. When he wakes.
See, the advantage is that we're seeing Helen appreciate his story, so we're emphasising the fact that she's paying attention and she's interested and she's enjoying it.
Morning is a long line. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands for tea to be...
So the question is, having broken out to the two-shot, where do we go back to Tim?
Long line. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands for tea to be brought up and served.
Let's go back for that little chuckle. Let's try that. So I've marked it just before the chuckle. So let's find the equivalent point on Tim's single.
When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands that tea be brought up and served. I always answer the...
So there it is. Served. And as you can see from the two pictures here, his facial expression looks good. So I'm going to do an in there.
I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout of Ruby, a la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs.
I think we're going to take it all the way to our planned cut back to the two-shot here. So I'm going to mark an out there and put Tim in. So let's have a look at that.
And demands for tea to be brought up and served. I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout.
Yeah, it's not bad. The sound's very good. I wonder whether we could just hang on to that two-shot frames more here.
Up and served. I always answer the phone.
Yes, that's better. So it's not in the middle of the word served. It seemed silly to be cutting in the middle of the word. And we're there for his little chuckle. Here we go again.
Up and served. I always answer the phone. Up and served. I always answer the phone.
So let's look at the whole thing in full frame.
Well, I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long line. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands for tea to be brought up and served. I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout of Ruby, a la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs. Well, that pleases him. It's just our little Sunday morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
I think that's pretty good. So the technique I adopted there was to see which bits of the two-shot I really wanted to see, and the rest sort of the jigsaw fell into place after that. The 2 points I chose on the two-shot was the fact that Helen moved back in the chair and got herself more comfortable, appreciating Tim's story, so that's a reasonable cut. And the other one was where she giggled at his joke about Ruby and upstairs, downstairs. Cutting to a two-shot away from the subject who is speaking is generally a weak cut. You're pulling away. You've got to have a very good reason for pulling away. And my two good reasons were Helen moving and Helen giggling. That means the viewer is not cheated from being pulled away from something which is being said and something which is important to something that's weaker, to a shot that's weaker. And the other important thing about this cut is to position your sound edits in the correct place, such that a word finishes, then there's an edit, then another word starts. Yes, you can cut in the middle of words, but generally the edits will be more successful if you're on percussive sounds like S's or P's or B's or K's, and not long vowel sounds. If you cut in the middle of those, you'll generally hear a click or a pop. As always with these videos, you've got the media to download along with good and bad versions. Have a particular listen to the bad version. Yes, there are a lot of cuts in all the wrong places, but the wrong places mean that the sound edits are also in the wrong place.
I'm always up first, and his idea of a good Sunday morning is a long lie-in. When he wakes, he calls me on the intercom and demands that tea be brought up and served. I always answer the phone with kitchen and sign off with the pretend shout of Ruby, a la Mrs. Bridges from upstairs downstairs. Well, that pleases him. It's just our little Sunday morning thing. He's a big fan, you see.
And if only those sounds were moved to the nearest good place, in other words, a good place of silence or an S or a percussive consonant sound, those edits would be a lot better. But download the media and have a go.